And so I would like to introduce Linnell Walcott and Stephen Carroll. Linnell is going to talk about FAR Part 8, and then Stephen Carroll will discuss GSA's new Federal Supply Schedule ordering procedures. Then, as before, we'll welcome Monica back to talk about the corresponding FAR Companion and Practitioner album. Before I turn it over to you, Linnell, I want to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and that we will share the slides of the recording on GSA.gov as soon as we possibly can. All right, Linnell, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linnell Walcott, GSA Lead AbilityOne Representative within the Office of Government-Wide Policy. Thank you all for joining this important conversation on the recent deviations to FAR Part 8. These updates matter because they don't just change technical language, they reshape how the federal government buys and how industry engages with those opportunities, each of which we will explain in more detail later. This slide shows a high-level look at the 4 revolutionary changes we'll discuss today to the FAR part that deals with prioritizing sources of supply and services. When changes happen here, it affects the order of priorities, the flow of acquisition, and the way agencies and contractors work together. The goal of these deviations is clear: to make the process more efficient, more transparent, and better aligned with government-wide priorities. I'll also talk about some of the key content that was retained to tell the whole picture. This is a snapshot of the new FAR structure with associated subparts. Of note here, sections are separated into clear categories, products and services, at 8.102 and 8.103 to reduce confusion and improve usability. This makes it easier to understand when and how requirements apply, improving clarity for both agencies and industry alike. We'll cover more on mandatory sources in a moment. FAR 8 also now contains a new section, 8.105, that was moved from FAR Part 51. This new section permits contractors to use government sources as part of providing a solution to an agency requirement and is now permitted for any contract type. We'll talk about existing contracts, AbilityOne, and schedule ordering procedures shortly. Some additional changes to the FAR structure are also important to note. In the past, FAR Part 8 could feel dense, overly prescriptive, and sometimes hard to navigate. The revisions address that by aligning the content to the logical flow of the acquisition cycle. Pre-solicitation, solicitation, evaluation, and award, and finally post-award. This alignment is intentional. Contracting officers, program managers, and industry can now find the information they need at the point in the process where it's actually relevant. Instead of moving back and forth across the regulation, the flow now mirrors how acquisition decisions are made. Another big change is simplification. The revised framework removes duplicative and outdated instructions. This makes it easier to apply the rules without confusion or second guessing. So what does this mean in practice? It means agencies have a cleaner roadmap to follow, and industry partners can better anticipate when and how certain requirements will come into play. Now let's talk about mandatory sources of supply and services under FAR Part 8, because this is really the foundation of federal procurement. The FAR sets out an order of precedence, essentially a checklist that contracting officers must follow before they ever look to the open market. These priorities matter because they're not just policy. They're grounded in statute and tied to our government's socioeconomic goals. Mandatory sources is now covered under the new subparts, 8.102 for services and 8.103 for supplies. For services under FAR 8.102, nothing has changed. Agencies must first consider services that are on the AbilityOne procurement list. If a service is on that list, such as virtual contact center support or custodial services, for example, it's because it's mandatory for that geographic location or building. Agencies can't bypass it unless there's a specific legal requirement or they obtain a waiver. AbilityOne remains the first stop for federal service contracts. For supplies under FAR 8.103, there's been a slight adjustment. The AbilityOne procurement list still holds its place. It remains fourth in priority order. Of course, there are always exceptions. Agencies can bypass mandatory sources only if required by law or if they obtain an authorized waiver, for example, a CNA waiver for AbilityOne. That flexibility is there, but the burden is on the agency to document and justify it. The slight adjustment you'll notice is the removal of the wholesale supply source, such as the GSA Global Supply as a mandatory source. This solution is considered a part of the category management structure. More specifically, it is considered a best-in-class solution, which I'll get into next. The key takeaway here is simple. The order of mandatory sources is reaffirmed and clarified, not overturned. The AbilityOne program continues to be central, the first stop for services and a critical step in supplies. So there's been a lot of interest in recent updates to FAR Part 8 and how existing contracts will be leveraged. RFO FAR 8.104 covers the use of existing contracts. So this is the first time category management principles have been addressed in the FAR. This chart summarizes how agencies will be thinking about using existing contracts. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the category management structure for those that aren't familiar. Tier 0 contracts are open market and largely decentralized contracts. These are the first opportunities agencies look to move to higher tiers. Tier 1 contracts are single agency. They include data sharing and analysis features and are limited to that agency. Under the contract consolidation EO, or executive order, agencies are encouraged to move away from these. Tier 2 contracts are multi-agency with broader management principles and broader data sharing. Many of our federal supply schedule contracts fall in this space. Tier 3, or best-in-class solutions, are government-wide and not mandatory. When the RFO text was first put out, it sounded like this category was mandatory. I'll show you a screenshot in a moment showing that this text was later clarified. But these contracts are not mandatory. These are the contracts where the Office of Federal Procurement Policy has previously deemed pricing and terms and conditions that align to best practices. Some FSS contracts, along with GWACs and OASIS, fall into this category. Tier 4 is the new addition. These contracts are considered required use. No contracts have been designated as Tier 4 to date, but once they are, they will become mandatory. Once established, agencies will need approval from their head of contracting activity if they do not use these contracts. Of course, there won't be a required use contract for every product or service, so agencies are instructed to go down the line in terms of existing contracts to use the highest tier contract possible. As I mentioned on this slide, you'll see that we made the first update to the RFO text as a result of the confusion the initial text caused. It was initially posted on August 14th that best-in-class contracts were mandatory, and it was corrected on August 29th to clarify. In short, Best-in-class contracts are not becoming mandatory. A new required tier is being created, but it has not been implemented yet. Agencies are being encouraged to move up the tiers, which means more emphasis on better managed government-wide solutions over time. The AbilityOne program remains a mandatory source for both supplies and services. This priority has not changed. One notable update is the subpart number. It now resides under FAR 8.2. The AbilityOne program is authorized, as you all know, under the Javits-Wagner-O'Day Act. At the heart of the program is a procurement list. That's the list of specific products and services designated as mandatory sources. The AbilityOne Commission manages this list. They set the fair market price and they authorize additions and deletions. So what does this mean for federal buyers? Under FAR 8.2, the rule is simple. For services and products procurement lists, agencies must buy it from an AbilityOne provider before they look to other sources. Agencies cannot skip this step. If for some reason they believe they cannot meet their requirement through AbilityOne, they must obtain a waiver. For industry, this is both a requirement and an opportunity. AbilityOne is a mandatory source unless waived, which means agencies will always check it first. But it also creates a competitive advantage for companies that partner or team with AbilityOne nonprofit agencies. By building those partnerships, industry can expand access to federal opportunities while helping the federal government meet its statutory and socioeconomic obligations. The FAR Part 8 updates reaffirm this priority. Even as new contract tiers and required use designations emerge, AbilityOne still sits above commercial sources. Agencies are reminded to check the procurement list first, and the program is woven directly into the acquisition lifecycle framework. So here are the key takeaways. AbilityOne remains a mandatory source under statute. Agencies must check the procurement list before turning to other contracts. Waivers are required for exceptions. And for industry, teaming with AbilityOne nonprofit agencies isn't just good compliance. It's a way to align with federal goals and strengthen your competitive position. That covers the key updates and what they mean for both agencies and industry. To take us deeper into FAR Part 8 deviations and the federal supply schedule ordering procedures, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Stephen Carroll.
Thanks, Linnell. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Carroll, and I'm the Acquisition Policy Director at GSA. I'm proud of what our team has accomplished, and I'm excited to highlight the updates we've made to the Federal Supply Schedule ordering procedures with you today. If you don't know, these procedures were previously located in FAR Subpart 8.4. This subpart took about 27 pages and more than 10,000 words to describe what is supposed to be a streamlined process for the federal government to order off GSA's existing Federal Supply Schedule contracts. The procedures have now been revised to create a streamlined structure that provides only the essential requirements needed to place orders and establish blanket purchase agreements under the Federal Supply Schedule contracts. This streamlined structure enhances the speed of acquisition and empowers acquisition professionals to use innovative approaches to acquire products, services, and solutions from the FSS program. So let's dive. Here's what I'm going to cover. First, the new location for the Federal Supply Schedule ordering procedures. Second, I'm going to talk about how we streamline the procedures. And third, I'm going to talk about key enhancements that will transform how we all work together. So here's a simple but powerful change. The ordering procedures now live where they logically should, with everything else about the Federal Supply Schedule. Just in case you are not aware yet, the ordering procedures have moved out of the FAR and into the GSA's Acquisition Regulation, or for short, the GSAR. This is consistent with GSA's statutory authority for the schedule program. This change is also another subtle ease of use enhancement. GSA has always managed the federal supply schedule and the procedures for establishing schedules at GSAR 538, but the order procedures were found elsewhere. Now, our acquisition workforce and our industry partners can find the complete federal supply schedule instructions all in one place. And specifically, the new ordering procedures are placed at GSAR 538.71. The language at FAR 38 has been removed in favor of the GSAR. With this move, it allows the acquisition system to benefit in three distinct ways. It drives iterative modernization. We can more rapidly and effectively adjust the order procedures and associated guidance to reflect and leverage changes and innovations found in the commercial and federal marketplace. Next, this update removes barriers by eliminating layers in the process of making updates to contracting and ordering process for the schedule program. And finally, it balances efficiency with oversight. Even with our ability to be responsive to the needs of our users, transparency and accountability remain in balance as the GSAR changes ultimately will go through the public rulemaking process. As I highlighted at the start, in modernizing these procedures, we streamlined it from about 10,000 words down to around 2,400 words. So instead of wading through excessive content, you now have a clear, focused resource that supports action. Let's explore this even deeper. So before this change, you had to navigate a maze of instructions scattered across the FAR subpart. You had to navigate checklists that added steps but not value. And you had to navigate requirements that slowed everyone down without improving outcomes. But now you get simple, clear language that lets the government focus on getting the right solutions. You get streamlined competition so you can concentrate on providing solutions instead of decoding complex solicitations. And you get real efficiency. We've removed unnecessary steps, redundant sign-offs, and checkboxes for the sake of checkboxes. So let's focus on some of these new enhancements. We've placed a big emphasis on innovation. The language goes out of its way to encourage the use of innovation and requests for quotation practices found on the periodic table of acquisition innovations. We've clarified that Part 15 does not apply to the federal supply schedule ordering process. These ordering procedures are not considered source selection. There is no requirement for evaluation plans, quotation scoring, or establishing a competitive range before communicating with quoters or soliciting revised quotations. And the language reflects that RFQs should be used irrespective of dollar value or type of requirement document. This will greatly benefit our workforce in your responses to task and delivery orders. Our updates to procedures embraces best value by directing agencies to award the order or establish the BPA with the FSS contractor that represents the best value. 8.4 previously used language like lowest cost alternative. This was confusing, and we've removed it to embrace best value. The language now calls out contracting team arrangements, or CTAs. Previously, FAR 8.4 didn't mention CTAs. Our new procedures highlight their ability to be used as a total solution. We've eliminated duplicative procedures based on statement of works. Previously, 8.4 had different steps for using a statement of work versus not using a statement of work. The new language consolidates this process, removes the focus on just one type of document, and modernizes it. This means you will see more statements of objectives and documents aligned to support better outcomes. We've eliminated restrictions on single award BPAs. This encourages more collective buying that we will expect will lead to better pricing. And we've listened to feedback and eliminated open market items confusion. It's now simply referred to order level materials instead of intermingling other terms like open market items or other direct costs. This update standardizes processes for obtaining items not priced on the FSS contracts and creates one method for obtaining these items, reducing confusion associated with multiple terms and methods. While they still cannot be the primary purpose of the order, the update also removes the arbitrary 33% restriction on these types of items. As Linnell alluded to earlier, we've increased access to government supply sources. Previously, contractor use of government supply sources under FAR Part 38 were largely restricted to cost reimbursement contracts. Now, agencies may authorize contractors to use government supply sources, including non-mandatory sources like FSS, to obtain necessary supplies or services for a government contract when it is deemed in the best interest of the government. This provides a total solution and reduces costs for the government and our industry partners. This may be particularly helpful for small businesses who don't have robust supply chains to leverage these discounted rates. And so what about what we retained? Let's talk about those highlights. And keep in mind, while we retained certain aspects of the previous ordering procedures, we revised them through streamlining and modernization. We kept small business discretion. We maintained the ability of customer agencies at their discretion to set aside orders for small businesses. It's important to note here that historically, under the FSS program, over 30% of the total value of purchases have gone to small businesses, far exceeding the government-wide goal of 23%. The new GSAR maintains that key acquisition tool to support small businesses and assist agencies in meeting their small business goals. Next, seeking at least 3 quotes remains. Maintaining adequate competition is critical to a well-functioning acquisition system. The new ordering procedures continue this mandate, but simplifies the overall process. Sole source justifications are revised to statutory exceptions, and documentation requirements are greatly streamlined. For items peculiar to one manufacturer, we conform changes to align with RFO FAR Part 11, items peculiar to one manufacturer language, so that there is consistency throughout the FAR system. And for disputes, we clarified the responsibilities around those disputes. The new FSS ordering procedures are now live on acquisition.gov. To our industry partners, we look forward to you harnessing this new language, providing commercial best practices and solutions, and partnering with agencies to provide successful mission outcomes. If you see room for improvements, please let us know. And with that, I want to turn it over to Monica so that she can highlight more practitioner resources for FAR Part 8 in general and these ordering procedures. Monica?
All right. Thank you, Stephen. And so as Stephen and Linnell shared a lot of the changes, one of the things as we shift into the FAR companion for FAR Part 8, it includes that content that was removed from the FAR and placed into the non-regulatory resources while also sharing best practices. So when we talk about these best practices, we really want the practitioner to make a thoughtful consideration of when they apply to their specific procurement. Remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But one of the items you'll see in the FAR companion, and talked a little bit about it earlier, is that periodic table of acquisition innovation, the PTAI. And so another content in that FAR Part 8 FAR companion is brief explanation, the contents for it. And so the PTAI provides those insights, use cases, and resources for streamlining acquisitions, and for the practitioner to really consider if they apply and how to apply it to their procurement. The FAR companion emphasizes the use of the PTAI for FAR Part 8 streamlining. We really want to lower the administrative burden on our acquisition workforce, as well as find ways to lower bid and proposal costs while still achieving the best value to the government and the American taxpayer. So you'll see proven innovative techniques like phase down select process. You see that highlighted on the screen, and comparative evaluation. These are some of the innovative techniques, 3 of the examples highlighted in the FAR companion. And one of the clear things that we've done in the FAR companion, just with the RFO overhaul, is delineate that source selection, FAR Part 15, and delineate between those 2 versus FAR Part 8. And so our workforce will embrace this. And so you could expect to see a lot more streamlined RFQs, and it may look a little different as the workforce embraces these innovative approaches, these opportunities for streamlining based on the guidance in the FAR companion. And so in the FAR companion, you'll see discretionary best practices on what a brief explanation of award decision may consist of. And the intent here is to promote the benefit of timely sharing relevant information with industry after an award is made. That's really important. And so these are just a few excerpts from the FAR Companion Part 8. I'm going to say it again. I'm so excited that, it's posted on yesterday. So really do encourage you to take a look at that. But we're going to go into really follow how that what you see in the Practitioner album was the things that you will see in the FAR Companion as you look through it. And so in the Practitioner album for FAR Part 8, it was really important to convey the significant changes to both the acquisition workforce and our industry partners. So you will find a practitioner's perspective and a job aid to understand the new changes and shift from the overly prescriptive framework that was found in FAR Subpart 4. One of the items is the emphasis on innovative RFQ approaches. Another is that clarification that quotations are not offers. Much of this content really amplifies the information that Linnell and Stephen just shared. One of the smart accelerators, again, provided a deeper dive into the PTAI and ways to use it for pre-award refinement, streamlining evaluation documentation, and post-award transparency and feedback. We shared a technique that was actually releasing the award decision document. Even after a contract is awarded, there are additional actions that the acquisition workforce can take to streamline the process and increase transparency in the award decision. So the Practitioner album shared that with the government-wide workforce. And so we also shared 2 innovative procedures that practitioners could use to improve the post-award communications with vendors. The FAR Part 8 overall, the rewrite and the overall itself presents lots of opportunities to streamline submission and review time while still providing the best support to the mission, right? We want to get those awards faster, but quality awards. And so the Part 8 album shared a host of acquisition techniques and previous smart accelerators that were found in previous FAR deviation releases. So a lot of the techniques, a lot of the things shared, they can be applicable to various FAR parts. Now, I'm going to share something else. In addition to the Practitioner albums, there's some other resources. Coaching support is available to the federal acquisition workforce. We already have master coaches working with the acquisition innovation advocates and agency innovation labs. And that coaching is going to provide immediate, personalized support to acquisition professionals to increase confidence during the transition and to learn from practice. It's about practice, putting these things into practice to inform additional enhancements to the new business principles and processes under the streamlined regulations. So coupled with the FAR Part 8 updates, the FAR Companion and the Practitioner album support FAR Part 8 core objectives of reducing time, complexity, and costs. And so with that, I will hand it back over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Linnell and Stephen. That was a lot of content, and you guys will not be surprised. I have a lot of questions for you. There are lots of things that people want to know about FAR Part 8. So, Stephen, we'll start with you. Will the model deviation and GSA's deviation to FAR Part 8 expand or restrict set-aside use under GSA schedules?
Yeah, this is a really important question, so thanks for submitting it. Small businesses have incredible opportunities through the GSA schedules, and we're committed to keeping it that way. As I touched on earlier, under our new GSAR procedures, customer agencies still have full discretion to set aside orders specifically for small businesses. The language states that order activities may set aside, reserve, or otherwise place orders or establish BPAs with small business concerns identified in FAR Part 19. As for the FSS program, for several years running, more than 35% of GSA scheduled dollars have gone to small businesses. That's not just good. That significantly outperforms any other major contract program in the federal government. The bottom line is that GSA schedules remains one of the most small business friendly contracting vehicles in the federal marketplace. And we're committed to keeping it that way while making it even easier for small businesses to succeed.
Thanks, Stephen. My next question is also for you, but before I get to it, I want to remind everyone that the slides from today and the recording will be posted on GSA.gov as soon as we can, and the link to that is in the chat. So check the chat, everyone. There's a link, and we're going to keep posting it in there. Don't worry, we will be posting this information on GSA.gov as soon as we can. All right, Stephen. Mass used to allow for agencies to purchase order-level materials at a value up to 33% of the total order cost, and to add other direct costs and open market items onto schedule orders for administrative convenience. Are all of these things still allowed?
Yeah, another good question. We touched on it a little bit earlier, and I can expand on this. So, yes, the new order procedure standardized the process for obtaining items not priced on FSS contracts, using the one term now, order level materials. And the arbitrary 33% limitation on the value of the order level materials has been removed. Since these items aren't priced on the schedule, the ordering CO will just need to determine the prices are fair and reasonable.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Monica, the next one's for you, and then Linnell, you're on deck. Monica, there's a section of the FAR companion that describes contents for a brief explanation. Are brief explanations required because they're in the FAR companion? If a brief explanation happens, does it have to include all the contents described in the FAR companion?
So I'll preface that everything in the FAR companion is a discretionary best practice. So it's not required from the content, right? If there is an act of a brief explanation within that number of days, it's something that information was provided to aid contracting officers and acquisition teams consider the benefit of timely sharing of relevant information in a brief explanation of the award decision. So it's really important for that feedback loop. And so one of the things that, as you're reading the content in the FAR companions, specifically even that reference that you just mentioned, if you have any recommendations to improve that language, please do share with us using the feedback form directly below the FAR companion link. So when a brief explanation is asked for, that FAR companion is something that is giving some discretionary best practice on what the content could look like.
Thanks, Monica. That's really helpful. All right, Linnell, I promised I'd get to you eventually. Will the priority for procurement via global supply be updated to lower it to a standard contract offering like mass contracts?
Michael, that is a great question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify. So GSA's global supply program is not a mandatory supply source. However, it is currently designated as a best-in-class or Tier 3 contract. So it's one of those contracts that agencies should consider as a top option as part of OMB's category management structure. And just to add, OMB may issue additional guidance on category management in the future. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Linnell. All right. Got a couple more questions on FAR Part 8. Stephen, as you mentioned, GSA's class deviation to the GSAR applies to the FSS program, Federal Supply Schedule program, and establishes procedures to be used by all ordering activities. Now, of course, other agencies must still publish deviations implementing the FAR Part 8 model deviation. But does GSA's class deviation apply to all agencies such that other agencies do not need to publish their own deviation regarding the ordering procedures?
Yeah, that's right. So GSA specifically issued this deviation for the purposes of establishing the FSS program ordering procedures in GSA's acquisition regulations, the GSAR, in response to implementing the FAR Council's model deviation text to FAR Part 8. However, agencies must issue implementing deviations for RFO Part 8 similar to all the other RFO parts that have been issued so far. This will ensure that agencies are responsive to RFO 8.401B that instructs that agencies follow the ordering procedures established by GSA in the GSAR.
All right, thank you, Stephen. That's a great explanation. I appreciate you explaining the difference between the model deviation and the GSA's deviation for the GSAR. All right, Linnell, I've got a couple more for you. These ones are both about FAR 8.104, so we're getting super specific. So 8.104 of the RFO version of the FAR states that agencies must use government-wide contracts and blanket purchase agreements that have been designated as required use by OFPP. When can we expect a list of required use vehicles? I think you touched on this a bit, but as we got this question from industry, I think it's worth highlighting the answer again.
Absolutely, I agree. So OMB has not provided a date yet for the designation of required use contracts. OMB may issue additional guidance on those contracts, on required use contracts and category management at some point in the future. So I would say stay tuned.
Right, Linnell, and sticking with you for our last question, how will those requirements in FAR 8.104 be enforced?
Another great question on this topic. And so each agency should have established procedures to implement Executive Order 14271 regarding commercial contracts. These review procedures should provide for the oversight and compliance checks. And as I mentioned previously to the other question, OMB may issue additional guidance on this in the future. So as you can see, we're right in the beginning stages of kind of setting up the procedural guidance for it, but we have not received it yet from OMB.
Thank you, Linnell. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Monica. Excellent presentations, and thank you for helping to answer some of industry's questions. Now, as Linnell and Stephen highlighted, parts 38 and 51 have been eliminated. That content has been moved to Part 8 and to the GSA, or GSA's regulatory supplement. And as Monica mentioned, the lineouts for parts 38 and 51 are part of the Part 8 Practitioner album. So, of course, this webinar is about parts 4, 8, 12, and 40, but 38 and 51 were really related, but now they are completely empty because that information has been moved. So I want to make sure to highlight that as that information is part of what we're talking about. We're just not referring to parts 38 and 51 anymore because they're empty.